Hello, curious folks. Welcome to the Concealed File channel. Today, we're delving into one of the most disturbing stories ever recorded in Canada, Robert Pickton's pig farm. A place that, at first glance, seemed like just a rural property, but hid unimaginable secrets. What began as a simple police operation in 2002 turned into a macabre discovery that shook the entire country. Behind the mud, the sheds, and the facade of clandestine parties lay the traces of dozens of missing women. An investigation that revealed not only a killer, but also profound institutional flaws in a system that chose to ignore the most vulnerable victims. Are you ready? Part 1. The shot that changed everything. It was February 2002 in Port Coquitlam, a small town in British Columbia, Canada. Police arrived at Robert Pickton's farm to execute a simple search warrant. They were looking for only an illegal firearm. Nothing indicated that that day would forever change the country's criminal history. Amidst the muddy terrain, with rusty sheds and the characteristic odor of a pigsty, the officers believed they would make just another routine seizure. But as they searched the site, they came across something completely outside of any police protocol. Personal belongings of missing women, strange remains, and signs of something much darker began to emerge. What should have been a trivial operation ended up opening the door to one of the greatest horrors ever recorded in Canada. The discovery that, behind the rural facade, a veritable clandestine cemetery operated. Robert Pickton's pig farm. And it all began with the metallic crack of a gunshot that never happened. A shot that was never fired, but which brought to light the echoes of dozens of silenced voices. Part 2. Childhood shaped by bloodstains. Before becoming the most feared name in Canadian criminal history, Robert Pickton already bore signs of isolation, neglect, and violence in his childhood. Born in 1949, he grew up on the same pig farm where decades later, he would hide macabre secrets. The family environment was far from welcoming. His father was described as absent and aggressive, while his mother was domineering, cold, and insensitive. The Pickton brothers were raised amid mud, blood, and the constant smell of slaughtered animals. It was a scenario that blurred the lines between life and death from an early age. A striking episode illustrates this trauma. As a child, Robert received a pet calf as a gift. He bonded with the animal, treating it like a companion. Until one day, when looking for it in the pigsty, he discovered that his mother had sent the animal to slaughter. The shock of this loss, transformed into silence and resentment, would be remembered by him for the rest of his life. That childhood, marked by rigidity, isolation, and normalized death, shaped Robert's psyche. Instead of learning empathy, he learned to stifle emotions. Instead of seeing animals and later people as living beings, he began to see them as disposable objects, part of a cycle of control that gave him power. It was in this fertile ground of abandonment and violence that the mind of a future killer began to germinate. Part 3. Between parties and shadows, the facade of social life. The Pickton farm wasn't just a pig farm. In the 1990s, Robert and his brother David transformed part of the land into an unusual venue, a makeshift party hall they named Piggy's Palace Good Times Society. Officially registered as a non-profit organization, the initiative claimed to have the goal of promoting community activities. In practice, the venue became an underground nightclub, capable of attracting hundreds of people per event. Local elite figures, police officers, business people, and even members of the Hells Angels, the notorious motorcycle gang, passed through. Amidst loud music, drinks, and excessive parties, few could have imagined the contrast that lurked just a few meters away. While the hall held the appearance of fun and sociability, in the darkness of the farm, women disappeared without a trace. This duality between party and death was not just coincidence, but a strategy. Piggy's Palace functioned as a smokescreen. It conferred a certain social prestige on the Pickton brothers and created a facade of normalcy that warded off suspicion. Who could have believed that behind this lively atmosphere, one of Canada's darkest crimes lurked? The paradox was disturbing. While some celebrated, others were silenced. The farm that seemed to pulse with life actually concealed a mechanism of death. Part 4: Invisible Victims, Marginalization that Facilitated Concealment. To understand how Robert Pickton managed to operate for so many years without being arrested, we must look at his victims and how society viewed them. Most of the missing women in Vancouver were sex workers, many of them Indigenous or addicted. They were women living on the margins, in conditions of extreme social vulnerability. This reality not only made them easy targets for Pickton, but also contributed to their disappearances being treated with indifference by authorities. Families repeatedly reported the disappearance of daughters, sisters, and mothers, but the response was almost always the same. The police claimed they had probably moved or decided to disappear on their own. In practice, institutional prejudice and social stigma created the perfect scenario for Pickton to continue his hunt. These women were seen as second-class citizens, and their absence did not generate the same urgency as if they were middle or upper-class women. The result was devastating. Every police oversight became a window of opportunity for the killer, and every uninvestigated absence became a collective silence. These victims weren't numbers in a statistic. They were lives, stories, dreams, made invisible by prejudice and negligence. Part 5: The Horror in the Mud, Feeding Pigs, Human Remains. As the investigation progressed, the details uncovered at Robert Pickton's farm revealed a scene so grotesque, it surpassed imagination. Forensic teams found human remains mixed with the soil, in machinery, buckets, and freezers. Many of these remains were minute fragments, requiring DNA analysis to confirm identities. But the most disturbing revelation was another. Pickton didn't just kill his victims, he fed their bodies to pigs. In some reports, there were even indications that the animal's meat, mixed with human remains, could have been sold for consumption. The mere possibility of this triggered a public health alert, prompting authorities to warn that any meat from the farm could be contaminated. This detail brought to light an even deeper horror. The boundary between humans and animals, life and food, was violated in unimaginable ways. Unknowingly eating the meat of a pig that had fed on human bodies became a collective nightmare that loomed large over the community. More than just killing, Pickton reduced human lives to disposable meat, as if they were worthless remains. It was the total objectification of existence, the ultimate degree of dehumanization. The true terror here wasn't in legends or fictional monsters. It was in the mud of an ordinary farm where human beings had become animal feed. Part 6: Failed and Silenced Investigations, The Institutional Error. One of the most revolting aspects of this case lies not only in what Robert Pickton did, but in what the authorities failed to do. For years, complaints and leads piled up around the farm. There were reports of women escaping assassination attempts, stories of violent parties, and even rumors that a freezer on the property contained human flesh. Abandoned vehicles and bags of missing women were also seen at the site. Yet, the police failed to act with the necessary seriousness. Many of these alerts were simply dismissed as rumors from marginalized people. The perception that the victims were sex workers or women in vulnerable situations reinforced institutional bias. Their voices carried no weight. This negligence prolonged Pickton's reign of terror. Each ignored report was another opportunity for him to hunt his victims. Each ignored tip represented lives that could have been saved. When the truth finally came to light, it wasn't just a serial killer who was exposed, but also a flawed system. A system that chose who deserved to be protected and who could be forgotten. Part 7: The Monster's Confession. 49 bodies, 6 convictions. When Robert Pickton was finally arrested in 2002, the scale of his crimes still seemed unimaginable. But the killer himself made it clear how horrific it was. While in his cell, Pickton spoke to an undercover officer, believing he was in front of another inmate. During the conversation, he made a chilling confession. He said he had killed 49 women and lamented not having reached 50, as if it were a personal goal. Despite this confession and the dozens of pieces of evidence uncovered, the Canadian justice system faced an impasse. Pickton was convicted of only 6 second-degree murders, considered the strongest cases warranting a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Another 20 cases were suspended, and dozens of disappearances never reached trial. The discrepancy between the number of known victims and the number of convictions left deep scars. Many families were left with the feeling that the justice system failed to fully recognize the extent of their losses. How can justice be measured when nearly 50 lives were cut short, but only half a dozen official convictions were handed down? This chasm between truth and verdict has become one of the greatest symbols of impunity associated with the case. Part 8: The Final Death and the Sense of Relief. In 2024, more than 2 decades after his arrest, Robert Pickton met his end behind bars. Held in a maximum security prison, he was attacked by another inmate who violently struck him with a broken broom handle. Pickton succumbed to his injuries. His death was met with mixed reactions by Canadian society. For some families, it represented a belated relief, a kind of justice the courts were never able to fully deliver. For others, it brought only the painful reminder that no closure could repair the irreparable loss of so many women. Unlike many serial killers who seek fame or attempt to justify their actions, Pickton died without leaving a speech or explanation. His exit from the scene was as brutal as the crimes he committed, but paradoxically, it brought a sense of emotional liberation to those who lived decades under the shadow of his existence. However, his death also ended any chance for further answers. Questions remain. How many victims were there really? What was never discovered on the farm? The killer's silence became another layer of mystery in a case already marked by impunity and institutional neglect. And now I want to hear from you. What struck you most about this case? Leave your opinion in the comments and share your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Here, we don't just report on crimes, we investigate their causes and consequences. See you in the next video.